Hello, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Staff and Students with Enhanced Digital Teaching and Learning. As I said, this is a Times Higher Education Roundtable in partnership with BibliU. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the head of branded content at THE, and I'd like to thank you all for joining today's discussion. A summary article and an on-demand video of today's roundtable will be published on the Times Higher website post-event, should you wish to revisit this content or share it with any colleagues. With the traditional campus model now becoming replaced by a personalised blend of in-person and online delivery, institutions need a new way to meet the fast-changing needs of both staff and students. From curating the right content to providing frictionless access to digital learning materials, colleges must consider teaching and learning holistically now to increase engagement and outcomes for all of their stakeholders. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce John Holdcroft, who's Associate Vice President for Business Development at BibliU, to tell us about how BibliU are supporting their university partners at the moment. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and thank you everyone joining the call. Quick reintroduction, it's John Holdcroft. My title is Associate Vice President at BibliU. I'm based in Seattle, Washington, although I'm coming today from Central Oregon, where I'm joining a president's meeting, community colleges in Oregon. So it's great to have some of the different perspectives, and it looks like a lot of you folks are from the four-year schools as well. But briefly about BibliU before I join the panel and turn it over to all these conversations. We started in 2015 in London, England. We have well over 100 people now. We started namely in England with libraries, where digital content in England and Europe was procured through deans of libraries, a little bit different model than the US, where we have bookstores and things like that. We've been in the US for about 2.5 years now, and probably have the majority of our accounts will soon probably be in the US. To be frank, we work namely with community colleges, so I can talk a little bit about what we're doing with them, but I'm also here to learn with all the people that work on four-year schools as well. So we are looking at this as a way of how we can work with bookstores and schools that are thinking about digital content and technology and rethinking their bookstore. A lot of this work probably was started through some of the things happening with COVID and the involvement of online learning and forced online learning that we all kind of dove into. Let me share my screen real quick and let me know. And I only have a few slides here. I promise I won't overwhelm people, but can you all see my screen? Looks like it's slowly loading. Okay. So what we talk about when we work with schools, and namely we work with community colleges, although interestingly enough, we do have a couple of very large private schools, the University of Phoenix and Grand Canyon University, which are, University of Phoenix is solely online, Grand Canyon is about 3/4 online. We have a solution called Universal Learning, and our main goals around this, and would love to see if this is a roundtable point to discuss, is getting all students content on day one, not just students that are wealthy, organized, prepared, or focused. So we work with a learning management system and integrate BibliU as an e-reader on top of that. And we provide all content on the first day of class or a week before the first day of class. And a lot of people like this because they cannot guarantee that students are getting content. And I'm kind of curious how this translates to some of the research institutions at a four-year school. A lot of the things that we hear in the community college environment, which you may hear as well in some of your conversations, cost of books are too high. A lot of students are just not buying books, whether that's they don't have their financial aid check or they're just delaying that. It's interesting. I've been here in Oregon the past 2 days, and again, a lot of you know this already, but the amount of housing and food insecurity for a lot of students, and it's not just in small rural or deeply urban environments. It's really all around in the community college environment. We're seeing a lot of this, and we don't think that we solve everything by providing digital content on day one, but we know that this can help with issues around equity, and that's what we're trying to do. We do allow faculty to choose any content. We work with all major publishers. We do have OER content as well. A lot of schools have fragmented experiences with digital content and digital learning. They'll buy some books from Pearson or Elsevier, and then some won't use books. And we just try to unify that all through the same experience through our app as well. So just real quick, what we talk to community colleges about, it might be relevant to the four-year world. We charge a per student, per class fee. We bill the institution, and then the institution bills students. Now, some institutions might say, we have foundation money, and if you bill us 50 per course, we're going to bill students 25. Some may look at us as a digital and virtual bookstore and say, can we add $1 and have a small amount of money that goes towards student services? And we're agnostic to all of that, but we do bill the institution. We integrate with, as I said, the learning management system on campus. Here in the West, Canvas is very popular, probably some of your schools as well. As I said, we have all content, including OER content. We also make courseware available. We, as I said, can create auxiliary revenue if schools are interested. And we hope that we can help some schools be more efficient in how they look at it. If OER is a big driver around digital content and digital learning, we always lower our costs based on the total OER usage. A lot of people on some campuses are driving this, particularly in California and Oregon. I think that Florida has a lot of folks driving OER usage as well, and perhaps New York State. So we are a partner that works doing that as well. We also provide analytics, and I don't know if this is a relevant point for the conversation later, but we don't gather any student data, so it's all the student ID through the LMS, but we help schools look at who's using content and who isn't. And for the community college system, that's that early warning system that, if you couple students who are struggling with their grades, as well as students who are not engaged in the material, well, perhaps you can keep, the bottom 10% from dropping out and failing or persisting to their graduating to a four-year degree. We can look at this at an institutional level as well as a class level. You don't have to do this. I know some people have some concerns about, monitoring. And again, we don't gather any personal data. The school can turn this on or off, and it comes available as well. Just to kind of show you the types of schools we work with, like I said, we do have gigantic schools, but we work with community colleges for the most part. We are very curious about the four-year space, but South Piedmont Community College, WSU Tech, which is connected to WSU in Kansas as well, Jackson College, a small rural college in Michigan, which feeds into either Michigan State or the University of Michigan, and St. Thomas, which is a program in Miami as well. Just kind of what people are looking at with digital learning and how we helped, and then I'll turn it back over to Alistair. Jackson College, they had a traditional bookstore. They went under COVID lockdown. They were already thinking, is the bookstore serving us? Are students going to the bookstore? Are they buying books? We connected with them at the presidential level and just said, give us an opportunity to change your bookstore into just a retail space and some food services, and let other parts of the institution focus on learning. And at Jackson College, they have a huge equity driver, and the president said, I am determined to remove all issues of unfairness around equity by 2025. And he sees BibliU as one partner. We aren't the only company that can help him do that, but that's one of the advantages. He likes the fact that on day one, every student has a book in their learning management system, not just the ones that have figured out their financial aid check, are organized, are wealthy, and prepared. So again, we think we help, but we know we're only one of many metrics on campus. And then just showing you the University of Phoenix, which might be interesting to folks on the call and might be less relevant, but they are focused solely on online digital learning, and we run about 100,000 students a year. They have rolling starts, so we work with them every month on about 1,600 courses. So some different challenges than perhaps some of the folks on the call, but an interesting conversation nonetheless of how Phoenix looks at it. And then, as I said, we are publisher agnostic. We support faculty and student choice. We work with obscure publishers. We work with the Pearsons and McGraws. We work with OER resources and a lot of schools like that they can offload some of the responsibilities. So just kind of giving you an idea of what we're doing, namely in the community college space. And I hope it's relevant to the conversation. And I just want to say thank you for involving BibliU in this. And Alistair, if it's okay, I will turn it back to you. And hopefully I respectfully did about 10 minutes of time there.
That's all right. You're perfectly on time. Thanks, John. I think that raises some questions that complement some of the points for discussion that we circulated beforehand. I think the first one is how students' expectations of course curricula are changing, and how much does this kind of day one delivery meet that expectation? How much does it change that expectation? I'd like to start things off by asking the panel what differences they've seen in terms of the expectations from students on their course at their institutions, and how they're addressing that through digital delivery of curricula or just learning materials in general. It's always very quiet when I ask the first question, and eventually someone cracks, and then we all get talking after that. Jeff, can I come to you first, please? And if you don't mind just telling us your institution the first time you speak, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I'm Jeff King, University of Central Oklahoma. And in response to your question, I think there definitely have been changes in student expectations. I think one of the big pieces of this conversation revolves around, or will revolve around, what the institutional decisions happen to be regarding OER. For example, one of the large R1 institutions in our state has set up a process whereby faculty who create a textbook, if you will, textbook meaning textbook online, of course, how that process can be scaled so that the institution receives money as a result, and not so much to the faculty member other than quote unquote inside perks, if you will. So I think the discussion from the student perspective is whether I get the books online or whether I buy them physically, and we all know that that's not their preferred choice. No matter what process I happen to use to access my textbooks, what's the cost going to be, and how do I minimize that cost? And, you know, is there OER that I can skate by with, even though a faculty member has identified a textbook which is made available to me electronically for a certain cost. And then, of course, students talk with each other about, well, you can go to this site, go to that site, Google this, plug this in as a search term for YouTube. We all know how the students operate, but I do think that's a big piece of the conversation anyway.
Jeff, how is it changing curricula in general if you're trying to almost anticipate that in the first instance and build curricula that has resources attached to it that are manageable, that people, you know, there's a good chance that people are going to use the resources that you want them to use in the way you want them to use them?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. I mean, what our faculty do is, because of the type of student we serve, a lot of first generation, a lot of over 80% commuter, the typical state, regional university, metropolitan university student population. And so for that population, we do know that because of the challenges they face, our faculty are more or less clued in to the idea that they have to make accommodations, they have to reach out to the students, they have to figure out what's going on in the students' lives in order to help them the best way they can. And that does include the aspect of their access to the resources that they're going to use throughout the course and throughout the semester or the term. And so in my role leading our faculty professional development unit, I think from my perspective regarding this topic, that really key piece about getting the faculty up to speed and actually, yes, it has to be said explicitly, accepting the responsibility that it is their job to find these things out about their students in order to help them deal with textbooks, life issues, all of the things that what is more and more the typical college student looks like and has to deal with.
Okay, thank you. Susan, could I come to you next, please, just to ask about whether you've seen much diversification in terms of how different types of students approach this when they are being asked to learn online?
Sure. Yeah. And I think, of course, there's a wide disciplinary variety as well. I mean, what purpose the text serves in different courses is going to be quite different. If it's serving to provide just the factual materials that are going to be covered in other ways in classes, that's quite different than when it's the actual object of study, for example, in my discipline of literature. So if you don't have the text that we're reading, you don't even have access to the object of study. And so I've seen some really interesting developments over the past decade or so with regard to how students access materials and how comfortable they feel annotating digital text, for example. And what's been sort of funny recently is that I have made quite an effort to give them as many digital free materials as I possibly can and to make those easily accessible. And sometimes they will bring in hard copies of books that they found, and they all gather around the book like it's some special, like, "Whoo, wow, you found this rare object." And they're often, used copies of texts that are in the public domain, and so they weren't expensive, but it suggests to me that objects can sometimes be really meaningful for students, and they do sometimes find it easier to be able to say get away from their screens with a book. But at the same time, I feel really committed to the opportunities that we have to make these things available from day one, to make them very inexpensive. To for example, I also have found it really productive to have conversations via social annotation tools with digital texts. And so, I think the interesting thing for me has been in the sort of wide variety I see among students, sort of using all different kinds of materials and making use of them in ways that are engaging for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Several of you are joining us from colleges of education, or you are leaders for digital transformation or other forms of widening access and equity. To Susan's point, does this show that there is still a real need for getting the blend right for different students as part of that personalization? And I was just wondering if anyone had any thoughts about any trends overall that are supporting students and staff quite well when they try and make these adjustments. Pick on someone. Mary Ellen, can we come to you, please, if you don't mind telling us your job title and your institution?
Hi, Mary Ellen Wiltroud from MIT, Director of Online and Learning and Blended Learning Initiatives, and in the Department of Biology. So I think I have some comments from what Susan said, and just based on your initial question, and then building on what you just asked now. that MIT really has had a culture of not using textbooks much or relying on them in many of their courses. And I also felt the same as Susan, like it depends on the context of the course, because humanities will have specific books that they're focusing on. But I come from the sciences, so the sciences have used textbooks as really, the students know, like it's kind of an optional feature, like they're there, but they're just supplement if you need to use them. And there has been more of a focus on having the courses provide the courseware of what's needed. And so over years, faculty have been developing what they need as resources for their courses. And we also have the culture of being open. So for sure, OER is really big, and MIT OpenCourseWare, started more than 20 years ago. And so we really encourage sharing of resources to the outside as well as internally. And we have my big thing that I've worked on, is MOOCs for massive open online courses. And so when we create the MOOCs, we really want to have that focus be on creating courseware that is going to be used with the MIT students on campus as well. And so it's tailored to what's being taught in those courses, and videos, text, images, and all of those materials. So that's really where, like, for sure, there's an expectation now from students that the course has a lot of digital resources and that it is part of the courseware, not that they need to go search the internet to try to find what they need. It should be really obvious what they need to get and use in that course, and that it should be available in digital format at this point.
So, and what does the curation of that content look like? Because it sounds like obviously you've got a very strong foundation on which to build and which to create new types of content constantly. Do you almost have to guard against an overload or giving students too much and not knowing how to pick their path through it?
Yeah, for sure. I think prior to the pandemic, people were definitely getting into having students having to log into too many websites. But that it was solved somewhat because we got a license for Canvas, and Canvas had integration with a lot of the tools that we were using, and we got a lot of licenses that way. So that allowed the process and experience to be more streamlined for students, so that when they're logging in, they see everything in one place. That helped a lot. We also, it's not possible necessarily by individual faculty to do this on their own. And so we have a lot of people who are discipline experts who are helping with this, and that's called the Digital Learning Lab. And that has been, when you asked about strategy, that's been a really successful strategy, in having discipline experts that also know the technology side and can help with the pedagogy to implement these changes in courses. And it's definitely not a one-time change the entire course kind of thing. It's building over years.
Okay, thank you very much.
Alistair,
I was just about to come to you to ask, because of your background. Do you mind just telling people who you are and where you're from, please?
Sorry, I got out of my lane. I'm Doug Harrison. I'm the Vice President and Dean of the School of Cybersecurity and Information Technology at the University of Maryland Global Campus. We're Maryland's online open access global university and the largest public online university in the US. Mary Ellen's comments made me think about how not just what customization or personalization for students looks like, but also pedagogically what is the right, think about sort of your backwards design goal around the curriculum. We've been an OER institution for almost 10 years now, but that means maybe free or no cost to students, but that doesn't mean to the institution. And so our balance is, what is the strategy for how you resource that, but also put together the right pedagogical mix for students. In my world of information technology and cybersecurity, we really focus on applied learning. And for us, when you think about career relevant education that's aligned to fast moving technology fields, a lot of what our students are learning with in terms of tools, they're not textbooks, of course, because we don't use many textbooks, or if we do, they're very disaggregated and dechunked. But they use a lot of educational technology. And so if you think about the mix of the textual resources that they'll encounter, a lot of that is more instructional guides or assistive tools to access either our own internal technology platforms for them to practice and do the things that they'll be held accountable for in the summative moment of learning demonstration, or sometimes a third-party partner tool, which is either because we couldn't afford to be able to keep something current or relevant the way a third-party partner could, or because often in technology, third parties have the most industry-aligned curriculum. So I think it's that mix is not just a question of how to meet the student expectation, which is absolutely changing and evolving, but also what is the right pedagogical alignment of that mix, because to Susan's point, students may want lots of videos, but if you're teaching Jane Austen, you're teaching Jane Austen, right? And you can bring videos and other interactive tools in, but the text is the core. I'm an English professor by training, though I got a very weird path in my career some ways. So I'm very sympathetic to that. So I think I want to make that point about educational technology as an illustration of the pedagogical drivers of how those decisions are made about diversity of material and the best way to get to the learning goal and outcome.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about cybersecurity because it's one of those subjects that regularly seems to top the charts in terms of job shortages and where there's a real demand for graduates. Does that kind of expectation from the market that this is a need that this needs to be met, this needs to be filled, how has that flowed backwards into curriculum, and has it changed the way that you're putting curriculum design together now?
It absolutely does. I mean, cybersecurity is not as new of a field as it used to be, but in terms of how universities think, it's still a very new field, maybe 10, 20 years as a recognized sort of discipline. And there are challenges that come with that, but I think at this point, the industry and the field has really coalesced to a degree that most applied or technical or professional fields haven't, around first of all, foregrounding skills. And I think that's a movement that I don't think is a coincidence as having gained visibility and currency in higher ed during and after the pandemic. And that the profession has really organized itself around not just skills, but industry certifications as a kind of lingua franca of the field between education, industry, government, military defense, so that there's a much higher degree of consensus about what those skills are. And when that's because they're driven by the provision of industry certifications around the progression of knowledge, skills, abilities, and dispositions that drive different types of job roles and functions. We're proudly, unashamedly a liberal arts grounded, general education driven university. And so while we have to align to, and we want to align to those industry certifications in our credit bearing curriculum, we're also then building around that the more enduring or essential skills that you wouldn't get if you only taught exclusively to the particular KSADs that a certification exam would get you if you just went on your own out in the open market and took it. And so we feel like that from a curriculum design perspective, we have two obligations here. One is to absolutely ensure that we're sending that student as well prepared as they can to get the exam and make the reskilling or the upskilling move that they want to leverage in their career, but that we have an obligation and a desire to really kind of turbocharge that learning so that they've got the skill itself and they've got those sort of essential and enduring skills around it that we think is part of our marketable difference as a university with a big footprint in this space.
Great, thank you very much. To that point about skills education, I'd like to come to Anna next, if I may, just because of your role at Wichita State University concerns online and adult learning in particular. And when we talk about upskilling and reskilling, it's something that is increasingly part of that conversation too.
Most certainly. So a lot of our students that are doing either online or coming back to school, they're doing it to either get that job they wanted or to move up in their career. They bumped up against a level where if they don't have a degree, they can't get it. I see that there's still a very strong need in upskilling, which can go against the traditional pathway of liberal arts study. And it's a constant battle at a university like Wichita State, where we focus on applied learning, but we still focus on that liberal arts core. That was where we started. we were a liberal arts institution to begin with, and then we grew from there. So I see that, like Douglas was saying, there's a real strong need for tying in the workforce needs with the educating the entire whole of the person, which is the aim for liberal arts.
And does the digital delivery of learning materials, the type of thing John was talking about right at the top of the hour, is that something that is more in demand for adult learners, do you think, if they are perhaps time poor or space poor, or they're more inclined to learn at a distance or learn online?
I think it's mixed. So adult learners are not a monolithic unit. They typically tend to be highly internally motivated to finish their degrees. And so they're not just trying to check off boxes, they're trying to do things, and they need to understand why they need to do things. So they're not going to buy a textbook unless they know that it's useful. So if they've heard from other students that a class has a textbook, but the faculty member never really refers to it, or you can pass the exams just by, listening to the lectures, then they will bypass that whole process. For some of them, paying for gas in their car is their big concern, because that's their way of getting to and from work, getting to and from grocery store, getting children to and from school, helping their parents, those kinds of things. And so if a textbook that's $250 versus filling up a tank of gas, they're going to go for the tank of gas, and they're just going to deal with it in the other way. We've seen that a lot. Providing students with no cost or very low cost materials does open up that door. That's one of the biggest things that I think does advantage more people, is by providing those outlets and opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much. Marcella, may I come to you next, please, to ask about your role? If you can perhaps, so I don't speak for you, explain to the panel what you do and where you're based, and how it perhaps resonates with the discussion we've had so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Marcela Ramirez. I'm the Associate Vice Provost at UT San Antonio. And so our institution is a 4-year higher education institution. Recently, we became R1, and we are really proud of that. And we're an HSI as well, Hispanic Serving Institution. So we really are focused on, cultivating excellence and social mobility for our students, and trying to make it more equitable as well. So we are offering a lot of variety of course delivery models. So we have, different blended and online and traditional curriculum design models for our courses. Mm-hmm. And so how it relates to the conversation is I lead a team of instructional designers that really partner with faculty on their curriculum design for high quality online courses and blended courses. And we're looking at options, how do we support our students at that very first day of class, where they can get access to some of those course materials, and also open educational resources. So we have a strong partnership with the library and other stakeholders at the institution to curate content easily for our students.
Okay, and to the point that one of the points that John raised at the beginning was monitoring at-risk students and the people who are at risk of dropping out. Have you, through digital learning, have you been able to stratify your student cohorts to identify who might be at most risk and address that with digital delivery?
So we're currently in that process. So we are looking at course insights, and we're looking at our at-risk students and seeing opportunities how we can change the curriculum design for it. We are piloting a couple of courses through that process, and have partnerships with Student Success and other models to do that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. John, can I come back to you for a moment, please? Your comment in the chat about the focus on micro degree and stackable credentials, how much of that is linked to the issue of employability and being able to give students greater flexibility so that they are not perhaps feeling overwhelmed or, as Anna said, perhaps they have other things outside of their education that slows their education and means they have to stop a longer, more linear course?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And the comment, while it's for the private schools we work with, it's very relevant to community colleges and obviously some of the four-year schools you guys represent. But so many people at community colleges and private schools are focused really on taking courses that get them to the job that they don't have right now, or maybe they have a job as a cybersecurity analyst, but they want to get a job as a project manager or something like that. So while there are formal four-year degree programs at University of Phoenix and other places that we work with, a lot of them are like, if we add 3 more courses, and our research says that in this local workforce, we can help people raise their base income 50% or 25%. So they like that core degree, and a lot of people go for that core degree, but a lot are like, how about an extra 6 months that makes my $80,000 job turn into $95,000. And I think for the community college, it's similar. A lot of people in the workforce environment there are going for a very specific reason and looking to be fully employable. Some of them are transferring to four-year schools, and that's obviously a goal as well. So we just try to make sure that if digital content is one of the things that will help them do that, that we're working effectively with these schools.
Okay, thank you. I had a follow-up question. You talk about how you're perhaps looking at local markets and local employment markets. Has the advent of data and digital delivery becoming more sophisticated, seen more people do this? And do you think it's something that still needs to scale and grow? Are enough people looking at their local situ and their links with local commerce?
Yeah, I think it's happening and will be happening more. The big push, when do 100% of all students learn digitally? I'm not quite sure when that is. I have a 19-year-old right now who's a digital native. He just started at the University of British Columbia, and he certainly would be ready for that. So I think that you'll see schools, a lot of schools that we work with have been beholden to traditional models because they've been doing traditional models, or they're locked into long-term contracts that perhaps served them in 2007 but don't now. So, and we also realize we're not a fit for every instance as well. So we're just trying to see where digital content is compelling and interesting, if we can deliver it effectively and at scale, and find the schools that would like to partner with us in that way.
Okay, I've got one final question before we go back to the panel. The publishers that you deal with, how attuned to this do you think they are?
Yeah, they are effective. The challenge with publishers is that they're going to focus on their content. Cengage wants to sell Cengage content, and Elsevier wants to sell nursing content. And so what we think we do is we are publisher agnostic, and we form agreements with them to be the platform of delivery. But there are some great models out there with publishers. It does force a school or faculty to have to lock into one school. And if you have somebody on the panel mentioned there's so many different apps or ways that people are getting content, and it's confusing and it's not unified, that's an experience well. So you'll go to the Pearson website or the Elsevier website, and we think what we can help with is if you go to the BibliU website or the BibliU app within the LMS, then it's all the same reader experience, even if it's OER, Pearson, or some of your own content. I know the gentleman from Oklahoma mentioned that as well, and we can upload content that is self-authored as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Very diplomatic answer about your publishing partners.
They're both friends and competitors, I guess, is one way to look at it, right?
Thank you. Deanna, can we come to you next, please, just to perhaps expand upon the certifications that you mentioned in the chat. And again, if you don't mind just telling us your job and your institution.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I'm Deanna Schultz. I'm at the University of Wisconsin Stout. It's a polytechnic university in Wisconsin. And I am the associate dean, one of the associate deans for the College of Arts and Human Sciences, and also the School of Education director. And my background is in career and technical education. So I've worked a lot with technical colleges, community colleges, and graduate education. So the certificates I was mentioning, we have a lot of online programs we have had for a long time, especially in the graduate programs on our campus. And we've developed some certificates that allow our students to try coursework, if you might say, before they jump into a master's degree. So we have actually an instructional design certificate that they can complete, and we've had a lot of students do that and to pursue careers in instructional design, and then go on to earn a master's in education or a master's in career and technical education. We created a certificate to bridge either going into the master's program in career and technical education, just people who find themselves in the community or technical college. We had a lawyer, he said, I'm now working for community and technical college, and I know nothing about this industry. I need something to help. And so we created a certificate at the graduate level that if somebody needed a master's, they could test it out, learn a little bit about the field, and obtain their master's if they wanted to using those credits, or go into our doctoral program. The courses would fit in as electives and not doctoral. So we're trying to be creative in how we combine courses that we have and create certificates that allow them, depending on what their path is and what their career goals are, to use those credits in different ways. And in terms of the digital, it's been really fascinating. You know, as a polytechnic, applied learning is huge. We're all about that. We actually started as a technical institute years and years ago, and grew into the four-year institution. And so the pandemic really shifted everyone's thinking about how to teach in different ways using technology that they hadn't before, right? And so our folks who had the on-campus programs really became creative. And I think it opened our eyes to the need for other tools and other ways to create some digital content that could be shared with students even now, right? Where we're at kind of in the tail end of the pandemic. So they have some additional resources and different ways that we can teach and use the technology. So I think that's a positive, I believe, that's come out of the pandemic for us, even though we were doing a lot of distance learning on our campus.
Okay, thank you. And those resources, are they always designed with the intent to be scalable, or is it more about personalization and customization?
At this point in time, basically customized for the programs, and I think that's something for us to consider going forward, right? We've gone through a lot of shifts and changes recently in structure and leadership on our campus, so we have to adapt to lots of things, and so we're looking at things differently, and that's an opportunity, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed, can we come to you next, please? Your role is centered around you teaching and learning with technology. If you could tell us about your institution and a bit more about that, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually with the Old Dominion University, Norfolk, Virginia. I think I echo some of the comments of my colleagues, obviously around several aspects. But I think the key from my perspective, one of the key variables in terms of the student interaction with textbook, whether paper-based or online, is and how actually the faculty are using them, how the course is designed, what activities are actually structured around the textbook. That basically drives in terms of the level of interaction and integration of textbook. However, even with that, I think one of the positive outcome actually of the pandemics is actually it showed us how unprepared we are when it comes to, for example, for student, because for example, we make a lot of assumption in terms of student preparedness and readiness, and we know for sure that you have a wide spectrum of preparedness, whether in terms of digital competencies or actually even in terms of access. We were surprised to hear that some students don't have access actually to a laptop, or let alone having access to, for example, bandwidth that will actually allow them to interact with all those resources. So in other words, there is actually a reality check that sinking in after the pandemic that we really need to reconfigure and rethink and have some of the lessons learned from this, because at the end of the day, and of course the same thing for the faculty as well, but at the end of the day, the lack of framework around student competencies, digital competencies, gives us actually really a very wide, basically a very diverse background to work from, not even considering what was mentioned earlier in terms of disciplinary, for example, differences between, humanities, science, labs, and so on and so forth. But to go back and kind of just summarize, I know there are a lot of ideas that I'm throwing in, but just to go back from actually a publisher's perspective, there is also a lack of understanding in terms of the dynamics of what happens. And that a lack of understanding is reflected, for example, as a faculty member, if I am teaching 3 different classes, I'm using three different platforms, I'm dealing with 3 different environments that have nothing to do with, I'm just kind of struggling actually in terms of how can I integrate those into our learning management system. And also I'm getting all these questions from our student telling me, I cannot do this, I cannot do that. So basically I'm stuck in the middle of this digital mix from the publishers. And here I'm just talking about the content itself, because remember, digital content is not just pages from textbook. It's all the assignments, the quizzes, basically the animation. You have a wide variety of content that has to be factored in terms of how it's integrated. And I think I'm going to stop here.
I just know it's interesting. I mean, in terms of your note about the lack of framework is interesting, because I think it chimes with Doug's comment in the content about, instruction being needed as to how to learn with digital learning resources. And I was wondering, as far as solving the framework problem, and is there best practice for integration that you have found so far, or is it still a work in progress?
Well, I mean, in terms of competency, student competency, digital competencies, there are a lot of frameworks, actually. You have the UNESCO frameworks, you have the European Union frameworks, you have here the EST framework. There are several ones. But in general, all of them, they kind of actually miss the point. Because when you're talking about digital competencies, for students, you have basically the use of the applications, and then of course you have a wide range of application, but also you have all the other aspect that is non-digital is actually learning how to learn, right? And I think one of the missing pieces of the framework is that most of the students, particularly freshman students, they don't know how to learn. In terms, they have no idea, because basically they transition from high school to university, and they're in a completely different environment. And then they are actually bombarded from all this kind of, from all kinds of directions with no clear pathway in terms of you need to, I know there are orientation, there are onboarding, there are a lot of effort. But for example, one study we did actually a few 3 or 4 years ago, just having an online orientation with focus on learning how to learn and digital competencies made a significant difference in terms of student learning outcome. And here we are talking about thousands of students in terms of the student population we used for the study. So the framework, yes, there are a lot of framework, but I think it has to be meshed with contextualized, because I think one of the issues of best practices are very often, it's a buzzword that doesn't mean a lot of anything, because it's decontextualized. It has to be context specific. So ODU's context is different from MIT. It's different from University of Maryland, because you are dealing with a very diverse student population.
Okay, thank you very much. We're got about 10 minutes left. I'm aware I haven't picked on Catherine or Rebecca yet, and they are both heavily involved in the online learning initiatives and provisions of their institutions. So, Rebecca, perhaps I'll come to you first. Do you mind telling us, what do you think is the biggest assumption that's been overturned in terms of student competencies, and what do you think the biggest success you've seen so far has been in terms of addressing it?
Sure. So first of all, I'm Rebecca Stein. I'm the Executive Director of the Online Learning Initiative at the University of Pennsylvania. And I think one thing that we learned a few important things in the last few years, one of them really being the importance of community and student engagement with the faculty and with each other. And what a challenge that is in the digital space, and some ways of overcoming it. We mentioned here a few times that students want flexibility and they want choices in terms of the digital resources that we give them. But coupled with that, we also have to make sure that the cognitive load isn't too big, right? And we make it easy for them to access the resources that they need, the faculty when they need the faculty, and also that we use these digital resources, not just for them to learn independently, but also to learn collaboratively. because once they engage collaboratively with content, they create a community, they create a sense of belonging, and that is a path to success. So that's definitely one thing we've been focusing on. The other thing I want to just mention here is we touched earlier on the move to digital learning and digital resources and what that means in terms of learning analytics. And I really feel that that is something that we haven't really empowered universities and allowed universities to use yet. All this data that is created by students moving into the online space. And honestly, we very seldom collect it, analyze it, or use it either to support the individual students or for quality improvement and quality iteration. So it would be wonderful to see some investment in this front.
Is that where's the bottleneck in your institution for that process? Is it with the teaching and learning staff or the administration or senior management?
So we do have some initiatives. So for example, we have individual programs that use engagement with our learning management system and ping faculty when students are not engaged for a period of time in the online space, and that helps for student support. We also do have the instructional team look at engagement throughout a course and flag if certain video is not getting engagement or certain assignment is causing trouble. So we do have initiatives on the program level and the course level, but I would say there isn't a unified digital strategy university-wide. And I don't know how many universities have, and I would love to hear from them.
Okay. Well, Catherine, without wishing to put you on the spot, have you seen any holistic strategies that are serving the kind of purpose that Rebecca flags there?
So my name is Kathy Schenker. I'm at American University, but at the School of Law, at the Washington College of Law. And so we have, I run a fully online Master of Legal Studies program, but we do it in partnership with 2U. And 2U is all about data analytics. And so I get a report after every single term of all the student evaluations, letting me know how students did in those classes, what their complaints were, did they complete their work, did they not complete their work? And so then I can go through and I can see, okay, these are the courses that need to be iterated, that don't need to be iterated. This is a professor who needs a little bit more training or doesn't need training, and so on. However, at the law school level or at the university level, no, we don't have anything. And so it would be great if we did. But also just going to materials within the MLS program, we definitely are pushing open source. And these are non-traditional learners. They're older. They're in a program because they want to get a promotion, something is going on in their lives. But for law students, for the JD students, there isn't that same push. And with teaching law, you could just be giving students free cases. You could just say, go onto Lexis, go onto Westlaw and pull up these 5 cases and read them for the next class. But professors don't do that. They like having law textbooks. A lot of the cases are already annotated within the textbook. And if you ask a professor, go and sort of annotate on your own, it takes a lot of time. And people simply don't have that. So I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon within law schools. Law schools tend to be fairly conservative. But at least within programs such as the MLS or an LLM, sort of programs that aren't geared towards the traditional degree, then you can see some changes.
Okay, thank you. It's an interesting contrast to the different types of discipline that other panelists have spoken about over the hour. I did have another question about how student communities are changing, because you said obviously you're collecting that data about where interventions are needed, perhaps with staff and perhaps with students. But do you notice a difference in how students are interacting with each other? I mean, I think it was Jeff who made the comment right at the very top about how, you know, materials get shared around and certain things get circumvented. But I'm curious, for a discipline like law, which is very much, you know, put someone on a trajectory to do a particular type of job, is there a way that students are talking to each other differently now during the learning process?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think that they are more aware of free resources online. And they tell one another. There's no doubt about that. And so, you know, also if you can get an older edition of a textbook, which doesn't have that many changes in it, you know, and someone finds the free Google version of it and passes it around the class. That definitely happens. And then, you know, they'll see who actually did buy the 4th edition, the most current edition, and, you know, see if they can quickly figure out what the changes are. So I think that law students have always worked in study groups. It's just traditionally they've always been encouraged to, and so I think that's still happening. And within those study groups, they certainly are finding new resources that are available.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got about 4 minutes left, to be precise. So I was just wondering, as we wrap up, if anyone had anything to contribute about any other changes that they would like to see made that they think are perhaps achievable in the next year or so that would help with digital delivery and help both their staff and their students. Oh, Anna, please.
I know where I sit, I hear accessibility all the time, but I'm realizing the more and more people I talk to, it's not the first thing on people's minds. And what I would love to see is for universities to band together to go towards the publishers and say, we know that you're not responsible for creating accessible materials. We are. We can't do this alone. Can you please help us create accessible materials, and then we'll all benefit. So that's one of the things I would love to see, is more advocacy from the universities out to the publishers, because we're the ones on the hook. We're the ones that are going to get sued. The publishers don't. So because we don't have to use their materials, and that's why we get sued first. So that's one of the things I'd love to see. And I think it's actionable within a year. We had to do a quick culture shift within 1 to 2 years in order to meet a National Federation for the Blind agreement. So it is doable. It does take a mammoth effort and a lot of moving people's cheese.
Okay, thank you. Doug, in a couple of minutes you've got left, you spoke about almost being overloaded with data and trying to find the stuff that was most useful to staff and students. Does there need to be a bespoke function with the institution for that to get the kind of holistic look at it that people like Rebecca were talking about?
Yeah, there does need to be, though I think just standing up a bunch more IR or data analysis people is not necessarily the best way to go do that. That needs to be embedded within instructional design and curriculum design and delivery functions, so that there's translatability around it. Even at a university that is fairly non-traditional like UMGC, there is still lots of baked in data skepticism by faculty who, you know, have a very granular on the ground look at what they're doing with their students. And we spend a lot of time either admiring a problem or trying to poke holes in the credibility of the data so we don't have to do anything about it if it's not what the recipient of that data wanted to hear or feels like their cheese is being moved, to Anna's point. So it's as much about sort of, and here I want to connect it to something Jeff said that I really resonate around. It's about connecting why data matters, because our job is not just about curriculum design and delivery of the things that we like in our discipline. You know, what we call non-academic challenges for students are not non-academic to them, to the points that several people have eloquently made here. And part of what learning analytics helps us understand where a student is disengaged, or where we can see that on this assignment in the last 3 semesters, 80% of your students, you know, there was a statistically significant deviation in how they performed. And so that might not be just that every student you know, didn't know that thing. It might be that we've designed or delivered it in some way that we need to reflect, or that it's misaligned with something that's going on more broadly in the academic calendar. You know, high holy days, or certain kinds of trends that are going on in students' lives that we put a high stakes exam right there. Okay, let's think about how we can solve for these things by thinking holistically about the student experience. And data has a lot to help us understand there within limits. It's only as good, to John's point in the chat, as what we can humanize and contextualize about it. But it absolutely has to have some, you Brits have that lovely use of bespoke. It needs some very intentional expertise to help advocate for cultural change rather than just dumping a lot of numbers on people.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That takes us to time, so I'm afraid we will have to wrap things up there, but thank you all very much for giving up your time and sharing your expertise today. It's been really interesting to hear from such a diverse group about where the differences lie and where the similarities cross over. As I said, there will be an on-demand recording of this made available and a summary article of the key points. We will share that with you once it's published. Thank you all again very much for your contributions. Thank you to John for joining us from BibliU. We hope to be able to see you at other Times Higher events in future. So thank you all again and goodbye.